Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper, here to introduce our recurring book club episodes with the book by President Barack Obama, A Promised Land. And this absolute beast, 700 pages.
And this is part one only.
Yeah.
This is part one of a two-part memoir.
Yeah, we read through this sucker. I mean, I have to admit, I did not read it terribly closely. I skimmed through a lot of sections. But you know, I think I'll say offhand that, you know, if you have time to read it, it's worth reading. Even if you're a lefty and you hate Obama, as I have come to very strongly dislike him.
Yep.
He's a smart guy, and he is I don't know, dishonest. I mean, we'll sort of get into that, but it's worth reckoning with his kind of perspective, you know, maybe even especially if you think that he basically screwed the pooch on all of his most important decisions, which, you know, I think is the case. But, you know, it's a kind of a vision and at the very least, a window into how someone who is very intelligent can sort of be trapped themselves into a situation where they end up doing things that or justifying things they think are kind of basically indefensible at the end of the day and didn't work and helped elect Donald Trump. So.
No, that's right. Yeah, no, I'd say, you know, pull it off of LibGen for free, have someone gift it to you.
Yeah, don't pay for it, for fuck's sake.
No need to pay for it. But it is actually...
You got a $65 million advance. Do not pay for this. I mean, like run into a Barnes & Noble and bribe the clerk to not pay for it. For God.
This is true. You know, in these dark times, people have to steal food. And so for our political education, if you have to steal this tome, I think it's worth doing to study. And yeah, I'd agree. You know, we'll go over it because we're going to do this top 10 passages from the book that pissed us off and compare our top 10 passages. But just generally speaking, for me, the kind of roller coaster in reading this, you know, having lived through it and having believed in Obama early on at the time, you know, it is all the more maddening and upsetting and important to study his kind of apologia and his account of things, because of how smart he is, because of how talented he is, because of how much possibility there was. Yeah, so we can get into all of that, but let's just say that there was, you know, various German words that probably capture the mix of emotions that I had reading this, because the kind of the lucidity, the astute observations, even just the prose style for someone writing a memoir, what was all you know, reminded me of why I kind of bought in on this presidency and on this candidate and this person. So, you know, now that the niceties are out of the way, we could rip them to shreds, but I just wanted to get that out there. Well, just after, you know, Trump and everything, just seeing the kind of the contrast a little bit with kind of the reasoned analysis and tempered approach to kind of thinking through his own mistakes and admitting his own, you know, perhaps stupidities, and admitting his sins and his flaws. You know, that's in there, coupled with his kind of sometimes weak sauce arguments for why he did things a certain way. So we can get into all that, but let's just say, I don't know, overall, it's worth reading, important to read historically, and there are lessons to be learned.
Yeah. Yeah, and as a final comment before we get on to our top 10 least favorite passages in the Obama Memoir Volume 1. This is, you know, I don't think I've read every book written by a president or allegedly written by a president, but I think I've probably read most of them. And, you know, this is fairly well written by presidential standards. Like, I'm pretty sure Obama himself actually wrote all of it, or pretty much all of it. doesn't hold a candle to the best book ever written by a president, which is Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs. That is a real piece of real honesty and real,
taking account.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, literally written by a guy dying of cancer who just needed the money, and didn't really give a shit about anything else, but telling his own story. So, how should we start this off? You want me to go first with my first?
Sure, you can kick it off. Let's just say the last non-top 10 point I want to make is that Obama also a bit of a dick. He did not thank Michelle Obama in the acknowledgments.
He thanked
what
her
an asshole.
many other times in the book.
What an asshole! I just want to say, but in any case,
yeah.
Go ahead. What's your number 10?
So my number 10 here, quote, I might be able to spark a new kind of politics or get a new generation to participate or bridge the divisions in the country better than other candidates could. So this is his explanation to, I think, Michelle.
To Michelle.
Why he wants to run for president. And
she's had enough. She's like, stop it. You keep going up and up and up. One is enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And this is the answer. And, maybe it's a little bit of hindsight bias, but like that answer fucking sucks. It's like,
well, yeah.
I might be able to spark a new kind of politics, ? What is in those politics? What kind of politics is in there? Or get a new generation to participate or bridge the divisions.
Yes,
and
that's
you
a
think
recurring theme.
You're going to be the best, the first black president, and you're going to bridge the divisions. Right. If you've studied a little American history, you think that's going to work out that well. You're going to reach out to people, and it struck me. I wrote a review of this. It was like sort of like democratic mindset and the neoliberal ideology, sort of coming out here. And I think this, it's like he kind of ended up, running for president because that was sort of the next rung on the ladder. He just didn't really have anything in particular he wanted to achieve. He even
questions his own motives throughout the book.
Yeah.
Like a number of times.
And it kind of, we might get into that. I didn't put it down any of those passages. I don't really find those convincing as actual interrogations of his own motivations. But, it's not like he had an ideological vision, it was like, here's a problem I want to fix. It's like, I want to have a new kind of politics and bridge the divisions, whatever those divisions are.
Not only that. So there are many places where he identifies correctly all kinds of structural problems with inequality, with racism, with poverty. He's literally like community organizing and seeing all of these asymmetries of power and all of these inequities and all of this corruption. So he knows this is part of what was just devastating to read this. He knows all of those problems, and he even sees like what the causes are, but he keeps coming back to this civility politics of bridging divides. And really what matters is healing through kind of, compromise and a kind of symbolic politics where people realize they should just all get along. Now I will say in this answer he gave to Michelle, the more poignant part of it was where he said, when black and brown kids look up at me as the president, their lives will be transformed in a certain way. That what's possible for them in life will be transformed. And I think that's true. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But it didn't need to be accompanied by a totally kind of vacuous, ideological understanding of what politics could achieve. And so like that there is this, for me, this theme between this kind of empty, centrist, symbolic nonsense and the fact that he does, time after time, actually seem to really get the problems and the intransigence of the GOP and the corruption of politics. So we can get to that more, but like these kind of quotes are especially problematic for me when it's clear that like on any number of levels, he's too smart for this nonsense.
Yeah, this is sort of the general formula of the book, how the book is written. Daniel Bessner, who we had on the podcast, pointed this out. He's been reading it. That basically like, he'll go through some history. He'll talk about something he's doing he'll identify basically the leftist, the socialist, gadfly critique of whatever it is, and then explain why that couldn't be done for whatever reason, and why his approach ultimately was the only one that could possibly succeed. And in most circumstances, it's just not convincing at all. And that, well, wait, you go before I get on.
So here's my number 10.
Go for it.
Yeah. So here's my number 10. And I chose quotes that weren't necessarily ones that have been promoted as much on Twitter. So I think a lot of people have probably already seen the quotations about him trying to get laid, right? By being conversant, right? Like being conversant in Marxism and studying the Frankfurt School. And,
there's a whole, these things happen. It's fine. That's a college thing. It's fine.
Right, but this is my one college Barack quotation, where again in the same kind of unserious way, he kind of says, quote, "The blundering exercise of military power, the rapaciousness of multinationals. Yeah, I got all that." Right, and right, like for me, like he is expressing that he understands, like college Barack understands the problem with imperialism, the problem with the rapaciousness of multinationals. It's so obvious that, like, yeah, I get that, right?
Yeah.
No, let's stop talking about it. It's so obvious.
Child slavery.
Yeah.
Yada.
So for me, this is important because, like, from an early age, and then throughout the book, he shows this. He really does get and understand, and doesn't actually rebut the nature of these problems with imperialism and capitalism.
Yep.
And so this makes his sins all the more problematic for me. So that's my number 10.
Yeah. I think we'll definitely get, this. Several of my quotes have some of the similar argument in there. Let me see. Okay, this one, talking about a little history here. Quote, "So widespread was the hardship." This is, by the way, he's talking about 1932, 1933, the transition after Franklin Roosevelt was elected. "So widespread was the hardship, so discredited were Republican policies that when a new bout of bank runs occurred during what was then a 4-month transition between presidencies, FDR made a point of rebuffing Hoover's efforts to enlist his help. He wanted to make sure that in the public's mind, his presidency marked a clean break, untarnished by past blunders." And so this pissed me off because, on the one hand, this is a slander against Left Anchor Podcast. Because we had historian Eric Rauschway, New Deal guy, on here to talk about why that is complete fucking horseshit. That is the opposite of truth. It was, in fact, Hoover who tried to exploit the bank run to get FDR to agree to political capitulations, namely just abandoning everything he had run on in the last election. And he did not want to fix the bank run. FDR said, "Let's do a bank holiday." Hoover said, "Fuck you, I'm not doing it." When he took power in March, FDR did a bank holiday, cleaned shit up, did a bunch of speeches explaining what he was doing. He fixed it in a matter of weeks. And so this is emblematic, number one, of, just garbage history. And so like Barack the intellectual is often just totally mistaken on the facts. And this is a very big example, and I think is a big justification from Obama world as to why he didn't do what FDR did. Is like, because FDR is being irresponsible. FDR was putting politics over fixing the economy, when what in fact FDR was doing was fixing the economy with politics. And Obama just, he doesn't want to admit that. So this fake history sort of ties into a general mistaken mindset and a way of looking at it's classic neoliberal technocracy naturalizing the economy, that like, oh, there's a financial crisis, we just have to fix things, quote unquote, fix things, which means return to the status quo ante without any changes, and not do, like a kind of, sweeping overhaul of things that will, address the
root causes. Yeah,
exactly. And we'll get into that probably later, I imagine. But a slander against history mainly. Like, God,
this is so maddening. And I might as well. I have my number 4, number 3 are FDR related, so I might as well go to those real quick.
Go for it.
So number 3. Quote, in the days leading up to the inauguration, I had read several books on FDR, on his first term and the implementation of the New Deal.
What books are you reading?
So that's the thing. So he must be reading the wrong, to quote Good Will Hunting, right? You're reading the wrong fucking books. So he's either reading the wrong fucking books, or it's all the more maddening because he has actually a proper understanding of the history, and then he doesn't implement it. So this goes to my number 4 quote. So this is a longer one. Bear with me, right? But I titled this quote on not being FDR. Okay. So he writes, this is Geithner, when Tim had expressed concern that overly harsh rhetoric directed at Wall Street might dissuade private investors from recapitalizing the banks and therefore prolong the financial crisis, I'd agreed to tone it down, despite objections from Axe and Gibbs. Now a sizable part of the country thought I cared more about the banks than I cared about them. When Larry had suggested that we pay out the Recovery Act's middle-class tax cuts in biweekly increments rather than in one lump sum, because research showed that people were more likely to spend the money that way, giving the economy a quicker boost, I'd said, great, let's do it, even though Rahm had warned that it meant no one would notice the slight bump in each paycheck. Now surveys showed that the majority of Americans believed I'd raised rather than lowered their taxes, all to pay for bank bailouts, the stimulus package, and healthcare. FDR would never have made such mistakes, I thought. He had understood that digging America out of the Depression was less a matter of getting every New Deal policy exactly right than of projecting confidence in the overall endeavor, impressing upon the public that the government had a handle on the situation. Just as he'd known in that crisis that in a crisis people needed a story that made sense of their hardships and spoke to their emotions, a morality tale with clear good guys and clear bad guys and a plot they could easily follow. In other words, FDR understood that to be effective, governance couldn't be so antiseptic that it set aside the basic stuff of politics. You had to sell your program, reward supporters, punch back against opponents, and amplify the facts that helped your cause while fudging the details that didn't. And he goes on, but like, motherfucker, like, you knew.
Yeah.
You knew.
Or he says he knew.
But like, he was reading books on FDR and the New Deal. He's talking exactly about the kind of thing that he didn't do, right?
Keep it simple and take credit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
I mean, I didn't mark this one down, but he talks about how, kind of boasts about how he wouldn't let any earmarks happen in the stimulus. And that would be incomprehensible to a politician like FDR. It's like, oh, we're going to hand out $800 billion worth of stimulus shit. Like, yeah, put your name all over that stuff. Just today, I went on a walk in the Wissahickon, park, and there are
beautiful park, Philly rocks.
There are little, I don't know what you call them, gazebo things that have WPA 1938 built, little cornerstones put on there with an engraved, inscription to say, yeah, but this is a government coming in to help you. Like, did they do anything like that? No, they didn't do it on purpose, because that would be irresponsible. Yeah, right. That would to not have your name on the checks. I mean, in this way, Donald Trump is much more intelligent, or much more sensible and politically to be like, we're handing out checks. Well, I need to sign the checks. I need to send out a letter.
His narcissism and constant need to be loved, led him to that obvious conclusion, which the overthinker here in Obama didn't see, but he should have. Yeah, so that's another theme, right? Like there are places where he talks about his inability. I mean, this is back to him trying to like basically regretting not getting laid more in college. But then also, like, there's a passage about, like, his friends telling him, you need to go out more, enjoy the moment. And then later on, his kids, in Hawaii are kind of weirded out by the fact that he can't ever just, like, relax in the water. He has to do laps literally every time he goes in the water. He can't just, like, wade in the water. So he's got some kind of neuroses or whatever. But I think we're piecing together some problems of character and will.
Yeah.
So let me go to my number 9. How about that? Or it's your turn. It's your turn for number 9.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Sort of picking them at random here, but let me do let me do the little story about how they were talking about the stimulus. So here's the discussion of the size of the stimulus. Christy Romer, this administration economist, she suggests that the stimulus package should be over $1 trillion. What Obama doesn't mention is that Larry Summers, the guy he picked to be head of the National
Economic Advisory.
Yeah, exactly.
Board, yeah.
Had already sort of pushed her to underbid herself. She said it should be probably 1.8 trillion, but she's still saying like 1.2 trillion. And Obama has quotes Rahm. "There's no fucking way," Rahm said. "Given the public's anger over the hundreds of billions of dollars already spent on the bank bailout," he said, "any number that began with a T would be a non-starter with lots of Democrats, not to mention Republicans." I turned to Joe Biden, who nodded in assent. "What can we get past?" I asked. 7, maybe 800 billion tops, Rahm said, and that's a stretch. And this, to me, earlier in the thing, he talks about how he, went way out of his way to get Rahm to be his chief of staff, and this is beta, timid. I mean, Rahm is a loudmouth, sweary asshole who is also a coward who gives up at the first sign of trouble. And
that's right.
And
just like Rahm wanted to give up on healthcare.
Yep.
He wanted to do like CHIP,
and
right?
judges. He's going to give up on appointing judges. It's like, what are you talking
Total
about,
coward.
dude? It's like, what are you made of? A blancmange? And so this is the entire discussion of the size of the stimulus is right here. And in other situations, in the interview with Jonathan Chait, Obama says that he talked about boosting the size of the stimulus. He's like, he had all discussions about getting it as big as possible. That's not true. That is either a lie or he doesn't know what he's talking about. Reed Hunt, in his book, A Crisis Wasted, he talks about how other people's tried to sell the administration on strategies to increase the size of the stimulus without increasing the sticker price, right? More bang for your buck. You could have a green infrastructure bank that would, according to the way that the scores work, you get $10 of loans for every $1 of appropriation. Or you could do you could do counterbalancing tax hikes in the 10-year budget window at the end of it. So you have a bunch of spending, and then you have a bunch of tax hikes that take effect in year 5 plus, and sort of cancel it out and keep the headline cost down. Or you could just refinance state and local debt, which usually has a somewhat higher rate of interest, with the federal government's rock bottom, world's lowest interest rate. I mean, literally less than nothing in many cases, after 2009. So administration rejected all those proposals. Hunt personally pitched Summers and Tim Geithner, Treasury Secretary, and head of Office of Management and Budget, Peter Orszag, on the Green Infrastructure Bank, which is directed at climate change, the single biggest problem humanity has ever faced. And they dismissed him out of hand. And so, there was not.
Notice that in that discussion, what didn't matter was the economic needs of the country, which also ties like significantly to the political success and political capital that they would gain from actually stimulating the economy. All that mattered is like a one-off assessment by Rahm Emanuel about what political possibility was. Just like a snap comment without any justification.
Gut check.
And that was it.
Yeah.
No idea. No thought to like, oh, maybe we can shift what's politically possible, or maybe we can cajole. Maybe we could be like LBJ. Maybe we could threaten like making sure at least all the Democrats are in line, and maybe we could then play politics and pin it on the opposition for failing. Any number of discussions that you might have about how to do the thing that would really help the country. Just quickly nipped in the bud with just like a closing of the window of what's possible. And that leads me to a quote that I have on Rahm Emanuel, actually.
Yeah.
And again, we're doing this out of order, but that's
whatever.
Totally fine. I'm Greek and associative anyway, whatever. So this was my number 5. I titled it like on personnel as policy, right? So quote, not all of my supporters were as enthusiastic. And this is about the choice of Rahm for his chief of staff. Hadn't Rahm supported Hillary a few grows? Didn't he represent the same old triangulating, Davos-attending, Wall Street coddling, Washington-focused, obsessively centrist version of the Democratic Party we'd been running against? How can you trust him? These were all variations on a question that would recur in the coming months. What kind of president did I intend to be? I had pulled off a neat trick during the campaign, attracting support from independents and even some moderate Republicans by promising bipartisanship and an end to slash and burn politics, while maintaining the enthusiasm of those on the left. I had done so not by telling different people what they wanted to hear, but by stating what I felt to be the truth, that in order to advance progressive policies like universal healthcare or immigration reform, it was not only possible, but necessary to avoid doctrinaire thinking, to place a premium on what worked and listen respectfully to what the other side had to say. I mean, if that passage doesn't piss you off, I don't even know.
Yeah.
He gets it. At the beginning, he gets it. Yes, of course, Rahm represents the Davos attending, Wall Street coddling, Washington focused, obsessively centrist politics of the Democratic Party. Like, he even says that's what he ran against. And this is why I feel better that we were duped, because he did run against that. He seemed so clearly as the opposite of the Clinton triangulation stuff. Like he really did seem like a different kind of politician at the time.
Yeah.
And he's aware of it, right? And then he ends with this kind of bullshit bipartisanship civility nonsense where like we haven't even got into it, but there's passage over passage after passage where he is observing the inability to get the other side to listen or to have like deliberative democracy work.
Yeah.
Like it's this massive cognitive dissonance that runs throughout.
Yeah. I didn't put this down in my quotes here, but there's a thing where he talks about he's pissed at people suggesting that George Bush should be prosecuted for war crimes because he's set up a torture tribunal. And, because Bush and his wife were nice to him personally. And, that I think is a major intellectual failure to not, it's like, he was in some ways tuned in with the kind of Democratic grassroots in the 2000s. He didn't support the Iraq War, but he didn't realize, and maybe still doesn't realize, how big of a fucking disaster George W. Bush was as president. I mean, it's still a pretty. I mean, I would say Bush is worse than Trump. All in, it's close. I'm kind of conflicted on the question. Trump's really fucking terrible. But Bush, I mean, he turned half the Middle East into the 30 Years War, I mean, ISIS, a million people dead. Trump may be worse for the US, but like he let Katrina drown still, thousands of people. I mean, the place still hasn't recovered. It may never recover. And that was, and it's like, oh, he was nice to me, like, what are you talking about, man? It was nearly as fucked up, back then as it is now. Bush came to power in a stolen election. It was, at the end of the day, basically stolen. Gore would have won, I'm convinced, a fair recount of all the votes. And they stopped the vote counting to put him in, in a way that was, facially illegitimate on a sort of like one person, one vote, basis. Gore had gotten more votes. And so, to be in 2008, thinking that you're going to be the person who's going to bridge the divide and you're going to, try to sort of break the fever yourself as a black person, the first black president seems just profoundly deluded. That's like, what are you smoking, man?
Well, and we'll get to this when I come back to my quotation that involves Bush. But there seems to be, and just briefly on Bush, Trump, and all that. Like, I think part of the problem is that so much suffering is caused from like doctrinaire conservatism and doctrinaire liberalism, to be frank. That when Trump does something that's outrageous and blatant and shows that cruelty is the point, that's seen as somehow substantively distinct from all the suffering caused with the civility and the adherence to norms and all that. Even though the Bush administration did breach all kinds of norms and stole an election and all that. But like in terms of the kind of facade, perception, right? Look, in a sense, Bush was trying to do the same thing that Obama was. He was the compassionate conservative. Yeah. Right? Like he was, and Obama even gives him credit for like not stoking Islamophobia. Like, so you can see these contrasts where Trump is just like blatantly Islamophobic and like, xenophobic as part of his strategy and just on its face. Whereas, who actually killed more people, right, that are Muslim, right. But that's kind of masked by these niceties of politicking that Obama kind of respects, because he thinks that that kind of civility politics is the answer to everything, because he sees the lack of maybe riots in the street or the ability for people to kind of like have a high approval rating for somebody as the healing of a nation, even when the same number of people or more are dying of poverty or killed in war or what have you. So we can get to that in a minute, but like he's definitely got this problem where he doesn't care as much about the actual lives of people here and abroad that are being affected, and cares more for like the kind of politics, as it were, like the tone of people talking to each other in Congress, or the fact that Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie," right? Which is bad, but like, it was a real dick move. But yet he still tries to kind of push this vision of civility politics. So I'll get back to the Bush quote in a minute, but I think it's your turn for a quotation, isn't it?
Yeah. Let me do.
You've thrown me off by going off of the numbers without doing the countdown and the numbers.
Yeah, sorry, I should have. I'm a disorganized leftist, and I don't know what I'm talking about. And I don't have a plan to solve. I don't want to take half a loaf.
It's better this way, because then we can connect our quotes up when they match up.
Let me do. So this is about the HAMP program, Obama's foreclosure policy, home assistance mortgage program, and home something refinance. It's HAMP and HARP. Anyway, he says, quote, "The goal was to target several million families teetering on the edge, those who lived in their homes and had made what seemed at the time like a responsible purchase, but now needed relief to get them through." And this is part of a section of the book which is either profoundly ignorant or dishonest. The point of Obama's housing policy was to take the losses from the subprime mortgage bubble and move them from the banks to homeowners. They convinced themselves, or they just said fuck the homeowners. Whatever it was, that was what needed to be done, and so the point explicitly, the which Tim Geithner said, Neil Barofsky, who Obama insults, by the way, I didn't write this down, but Obama insults this guy and said he doesn't know much about finance. But he was the inspector general for the bailout, and he has Elizabeth Warren talking to Tim Geithner. Tim Geithner says the point of our policy is to foam the runway for the banks, saying that to stop the foreclosures from coming in so fast. They can only take so many, not to stop the foreclosures. And so, there's a lot of evidence of this. I mean, that both Christy Romer and Austin Goolsbee tell Reed Hunt, I mentioned him before, that, there's this massive negative equity in all of these homes that has been translated into subprime mortgages and or subprime securities, rather, that are on the bank balance sheets. And so if you make the banks take the hit, the banks are going to be fucked. And the banks can't be fucked because the financial system is too fragile. And so you have to make homeowners take the hit. And that was sort of the calculation they made. And, what I think is really shitty about this passage is that he doesn't even defend, he says like, this is a program to help homeowners. No, it isn't. It's a program to fuck homeowners. It's to say, oh yeah, you bought it the wrong time. We're not going to help you. And our program is going to be designed to not help you. And when, there turns out to be, we'll get to this in a little bit. I think there's systematic crime. We're not going to do anything about it because that also would threaten the fragility of the banks. And so this speaks, I think, to when, Obama is so invested in this vision of the United States as like a sort of basically functional society that when you have like rampant criminality, like industrial scale document fraud, which is the robo-signing scandal, that he just won't, he doesn't mention it, never talks about it at all. I mean, this was one of the signature things that I would say produced Trump, and just doesn't talk about it because it just does not fit into his worldview.
He has kind of a throwaway line about, he revisits decisions and could I have done more here and there. He does have like a throwaway line like, except I do regret not doing more to prevent foreclosures.
Yeah.
Like he has that line in there, which is just a remarkable thing to say without specifying like how to do that would have gone against
my
his
pro-foreclosure policy seems to have created a lot of foreclosures. This sucks. I wish I could have done something about this.
I wish I could have done something about it. Oops. Yeah. It's really upsetting because, his arguments are so weak sauce when it goes to those obvious, the obvious harm he did to people, at a time where, there weren't any excuses really. And at least he has the, whatever integrity you might call it, to just like speed past it and say, okay, well, I'm not going to waste a bunch of time pretending, right, that I was justified. I'm just going to kind of like gloss over this and hope people don't notice. So here's my next quotation. And this is going back in time for when he was running for state senate. So, quote, "We filed our challenge with the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners, and when it became clear the board was going to rule in our favor, Alice dropped out. While we were at it, we knocked several other Democrats with bad petitions off the ballot as well. Without a Democratic opponent and with only token Republican opposition, I was on my way to the state Senate. Whatever vision I had for a more noble kind of politics, it would have to wait." Now, to me, this was super revealing, right? because he has to get cajoled by his staff to do a really obvious thing to defeat his opponent. His opponent who betrayed her commitment to him, not to contest, right?
Do a little background here. To what's the story here? You want me to tell it?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So he's running for state senate in Illinois, and the incumbent had run for a different office, I think, Alice something, and had promised him that she wasn't going to run for re-election. And so he jumped in, and part of the way the rules work, because America is like a two-party state, basically, like where it's virtually impossible for third parties to get on the ballot, you have to get a shitload of signatures that you present to the election officials to get on the ballot. And he had gone through a ton of effort to get those
huge amount of effort
to get those signatures.
They told him you get a bunch of them are invalid and discounted for various reasons.
Right.
And so you have to get like
a ton of political contestation happens through trying to basically rig the election like Republicans do now, trying to throw out people, try to change the rules so that you can't fight on any sort of like popular contest over who has the will of the majority population. You know, you're trying to like just fuck around with the rules. And so after he had gone through a ton of effort to get all of his signatures, he was sort of playing by the rules that sucked. This lady comes back in. I forget the context of that exactly, but basically it didn't work out or whatever in her other race, and so she had a bunch of bad signatures. Right, like, she jumps back in, and her signatures are they're probably faked up. And Obama is momentarily he's worried about challenging these signatures because basically you're winning by cheating in a sense. I mean, you're following the rules, but you're basically using those rules to kick somebody off the ballot rather than trying to beat them in a fair election. And then all of his advisors are like, she promised you. She said she wouldn't do it.
But notice one that like not only did he and his staff have to bust their ass to adhere to this, but Michelle Obama, right? Outdoes what he does. Like he says she probably got 4 times as many signatures as he did. She busted her ass for him, even though she hated it. She's like, I must really love you because like I really hate doing this. And like so, like the people he loved are working their asses off to get him to win, and he almost throws it away when like somebody who betrayed his trust and commitment got fake signatures, right, in order to beat him, and he's like reluctant to get her tossed for the fake signatures and for on something that he actually put in the effort for and people he loved and cared about put in the effort for. It just was so revealing to me that he thought the noble way would have been to let her stay in with the fake signatures and waste all the effort that his wife and his staff members went through to adhere to the rules. Like the idea that this was like Machiavellian or something was just so revealing to me when he encounters time and time again, not just like adhering to the rules and calling somebody out for not adhering to them, but like the kind of Mitch McConnell type politics that are so shrewd and just soulless. To me, it was just remarkable that his version of nobility was actually a misunderstanding of justice, a misunderstanding of virtue.
Narcissistic.
Right? So that to me, so that was quite revealing to me.
So let me do 2 of them here.
Sure.
So here he's talking about the lack of Wall Street prosecutions. He says, quote, "My Attorney General Eric Holder would later point out that as egregious as the behavior of the banks may have been leading up to the crisis, there were few indications that their executives had committed prosecutable offenses under existing statutes." And in a different spot, he says, he's talking about, sort of left-wing proposals, to like nationalize the banks, break up with the banks, so on and so on. But when you dig into the details, each of the options they propose, whether nationalization of the banks or stretching the definitions of criminal statutes to prosecute banking executives, or simply letting a portion of the banking system collapse so as to avoid moral hazard, would have required a violence to the social order, a wrenching of political and economic norms that almost certainly would have made things worse. And so this to me is like Obama's kind of bullshit rationalization coming out again, because as I talked about before, with the robo signing scandal, you had the banks, most of the big banks, had these mortgage servicers, in-house that were foreclosing on people with forged documents. And these forged documents were produced basically like industrial scale. You had people falsely attesting to knowledge of, mortgage documents hundreds of times a day. Just like, here's a, inch thick mortgage file. I open the front page. Boom, I know about this. Move on to the next one. That is fraud. That is mortgage fraud. That is document fraud. That is a crime. You cannot foreclose on someone unless you have the proof of ownership of the lien. Right. They did a wrist slap fine on this stuff. They didn't bust anyone for it. And it was intentional, it was because during the bubble years, they had been taking these mortgages and slicing and dicing them up into securities, and nobody had been keeping track of the paperwork. So when they went to try to find out who owned the mortgage, they didn't know. Yeah, there was no track of anything. And so I think that brings me to the second quote. You're talking about nationalizing the banks or in the first instance, stretching the definitions of criminal statutes. That is just straight up not true at all. You're talking about like this is egregious crime. This is, this is like just capping someone in the head in Times Square where 10,000 people are watching you. Really, really fucking blatant. And they got away with it because they're rich and because the crime is complicated. It was not any kind of like we're going to perp walk someone because like they're, it's a, complicated.
Well, let's do a show trial just to make an example out of somebody, whether we know they did anything wrong. Yeah. Yeah. It's not that at all.
And, so, we should probably return to nationalization, but it speaks to, the way that like Obama poses himself as, a sort of defender of, moderation. Small C conservatism, basically. Like we shouldn't do, too much. We shouldn't change things too much. Like, there's small changes better than big change, but like, when it's kind of the opposite of moderation as self-described to when you are presented with a huge crime, not to respond with a huge prosecution, to just let people get away with it because it would be big and controversial to prosecute the people involved because they're all rich and powerful, It's just it's why I sort of like come away with that Obama's sort of fundamental characteristic, aside from a sort of over intellectualization, which maybe we can get into that later, is this kind of cowardice. He says he's trying to defend the status quo, and it's like the status quo is being ripped to shreds right in front of your eyes. It's like the American dream, home ownership. This kind of a fucked up idea, but like, if you're a I believe in America type of person, and like the white picket fence and all this stuff, like that is being shredded, and you're not doing shit. You're letting people getting thrown out on the street. What the fuck is that? Yeah. Well, rich people will be inconvenienced.
Time and time again, I write next to like a number of quotes, cowardice or ignorance. And then like time and time again, I think it has to be cowardice because, there are times where it's like, okay, that's clearly a lie, but he's just too astute and aware, right? Unless there's just massive cognitive dissonance. And so this, I have other quotes that we'll get to as well, but since you brought that up, I'm going to go to the one that was going to be my number one, because it relates, right?
Yeah.
So he writes, for many thoughtful critics, though, the fact that I had engineered a return to pre-crisis normalcy is precisely the problem. A missed opportunity, if not a flat-out betrayal. According to this view, the financial crisis offered me a once-in-a-generation chance to reset the standards for normalcy, remaking not just the financial system, but the overall American economy as well. If only I had broken up the big banks and put an end to outsized pay packages, and sent some white-collar culprits to jail. So I'm kind of misquoting it here. If only I'd put an end to outsized pay packages and Wall Street's heads I win, tails you lose culture, then maybe today we'd have a more equitable system that served the interests of working families rather than a handful of billionaires. I understand such frustrations. In many ways, I share them. And
sure
then
you do. ...
because he goes on for a while, ... Someone with a more revolutionary soul might respond that all this would have been worth it, that you have to break some eggs to make an omelet. But as willing as I had always been to disrupt my own life in pursuit of an idea, I wasn't willing to take those same risks with the well-being of millions of people. In that sense, my first 100 days in office revealed a basic strand of my political character. I was a reformer, conservative in temperament, if not in vision.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he's full of shit in a lot of what he's saying there. But at the end of the day, he's admitting that, like, I'm a conservative in temperament, but also in vision. I don't want to disrupt things. I think if you read between the lines, he's bullshitting himself.
Yep.
Because what he's really saying there, I think, is that, like, I didn't want, right, to take advantage of a once in a generation chance to restructure our political economy. Like, I didn't want to do that. That's not who I am. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a conservative, not in the, kind of philosophical dressed up sense of like defending tradition and norms and so on. Because that would have required drastic action to save the American middle class. It's like, oh,
that's right.
Bad things might happen if I didn't let Wall Street get away with.
He wants to conserve the capitalist power structures.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And when the choice was between, the bonuses of Wall Street and 10 million foreclosures, he chose foreclosures. And now I think he's bullshitting himself about the difference between those two. And that, I think, conservatism, I think it tends to demonstrate the validity of Corey Robin's take on what conservatism really is, which is just defensive hierarchy, whatever it may be. And the more precarious that hierarchy is, the more hysterical and tendentious the defense needs to be.
And specifically seeing the kind of the challenging of hierarchy and the challenging of the power structures that are causing all this misery, seeing that challenge as itself what's divisive and as itself the thing that causes disharmony and conflict, rather than the agitation and the activism trying to change the thing that is structurally immiserating people, right? And that, I think, that's the fundamental difference, right, between somebody who believes the system is basically okay, and let's not prosecute, people that should be guilty of war crimes, and let's not really go after these fraudulent banks and bankers, because really what we need to do is sing Kumbaya together and have civility. And if we do that, then people's suffering is really alleviated. It's just a bananas, it's like a Stockholm syndrome of the neoliberal order.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I want to kind of close out here with a few foreign policy quotes.
If you don't mind, we can go for a little bit longer too. It depends if you have time. I have a few more quotes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not in any hurry.
Cool.
So let me start with his take on the sort of relative justice of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He says, quote, the actual wars in Afghanistan and Iraq hadn't involved the indiscriminate bombing or deliberate targeting of civilians that had been a routine part of even good wars like World War II. And with glaring exceptions like Abu Ghraib, our troops in theater had displayed a remarkable level of discipline and professionalism. And this struck me as like sort of, his level of denial as applied to the foreign policy realm is really, I mean,
he literally, if you like control search for drone, there's almost no mention of his drone strikes,
which radically ramped up under Obama. It's like you could sort of like make an argument for this. Okay, yes, we didn't do carpet bombing of like every city in Iraq like we did in
Cambodia and Vietnam.
Right, Cambodia, Vietnam, and World War II. You know, Dresden and
Dresden.
Tokyo. I mean, there's that famous sequence in the Fog of War. 67 Japanese cities that were basically flattened even before the nuclear bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki with fire bombs, and okay, yes, okay, what kind of a argument are you attempting to make here? But the difference is, I think, is that the Afghanistan and Iraq are not. These countries are not united political entities that were fighting the United States. Target like carpet bombing Fallujah wouldn't have made any sense because like Iraq was not at war with the United States at that time. And what they did do was basically similar to what happened in Dresden and Tokyo and so on. It was use of fucking phosphorus rounds and indiscriminate shelling and so on. Like a total blithe, a casual unconcern with civilian casualties in the face of whatever the military objectives had been decided to be, however that decision had been made.
Never mind the use of mercenaries and Eric Prince, right? Like, and the exactly. Untold use of basically private contractors who aren't, in any way accountable to the Geneva Convention or anything else. So, it is, he almost has to have just massive cognitive dissonance or is lying through his teeth. But I fear that he's not able to really come to terms with his own, administration's, involvement in the violence, that was basically years and years of occupation and the violence that inevitably comes with it in those countries, not to mention all the countries that we were droning and sending our kind of, various assassins to kill people in. Yeah.
And let me do one more quote here and I'll let you do one or two. He's talking about a long disquisition on who, like what he should do in Afghanistan, after discussion with the generals and so on. And he says, I didn't like the deal, but in what was becoming a pattern, the alternatives were worse. The stakes involved the risks of a possible collapse of the Afghan government or the Taliban gaining footholds in major cities were simply too high for us not to act. And this is what ended up being a huge surge into Afghanistan. And this, I think, again, speaks to Obama's, lack of intellectual willpower, because he says he has a very lucid explanation of how like, well, we invaded and it sort of didn't work out. The whole occupation is really fucking corrupt. We're paying off all these warlords and stuff, and it's really sort of stuck in a quagmire. But we can't do anything differently, and so we better send in 30,000 more troops. And never does he reckon with, like the disjunction again with the idea of nationalizing the banks or forcing the Federal Reserve to just like nationalize all the banks. We're going to get rid of all the mortgage debt, and then we're going to help the homeowners. Like we're getting rid of all this shit. We're just going to flush it down the toilet. Nobody has to deal with it anymore, except for all of the bank executives are going to fire. And then we're going to, start from scratch. We're just going to be at square one. And in the same way, he seems characterologically incapable of just thinking like the whole thing is fucked. It's never going to work. Right. Like the occupation is doomed. It cannot function. And you're making things worse. The occupation is perpetuating the political dysfunction in Afghanistan that makes it like the most corrupt country in the world, or the like 10th most corrupt, whatever. How like these things are impossible to measure.
Which is bananas, because specifically the book documents his conversation with Petraeus in Iraq, where he defeats the absurd logic of Petraeus, who was kind of like, McCain-like talking about short-term tactics, and Obama's like, okay, to what ends? Like, isn't it true that we would need more troops to do what you're saying? But then wouldn't we need to constantly be doing that? Like, isn't this a perpetual basically, like, this is an endless occupation, right? Is it, your logic only holds in the short term, right? Yep. Like at some point we have to leave, right?
Yep.
And Petraeus basically is like shrugging his shoulders and conceding the point. Like, well, yeah, I'm not talking about the long term. I'm just saying like right now to have whatever victory looks like. So like he susses out the absurdity of endless war and how the mission of the various kind of military chiefs only makes sense in the narrowest of windows, where they're just trying to accomplish some short-term shit, but like the long-term means it's endless occupation. Yeah. And he just doesn't apply that to Afghanistan. And it's just, it's very frustrating because he has the intellectual chops, and he doesn't have like a hawkish, seemingly a hawkish kind of appetite for war like some of the neocons do. He recounts seeing the tragedies of these young people who are wounded in war and so forth. So it's all the more upsetting because he seems to have like a kind of a level head about things, and then he goes and just does things without any kind of reason seemingly that contradicts his own logic. And I think we see this time and time again, where again, whether it's cowardice or inability to just be bold and do the thing that's needed, right? As Machiavelli teaches us, fortune favors the bold. He has that kind of just don't shake the boat kind of mentality, it seems like.
Yeah.
Which had disastrous effects. So my next quote here is on Reverend Wright, because he threw Reverend Wright under the bus a number of times. And so here's one of the passages. So he writes, quote, "There were times when I found Reverend Wright's sermons a little over the top. In the middle of a scholarly explication of the book of Matthew or Luke, he might insert a scathing critique of America's drug war, American militarism, capitalist greed, or the intractability of American racism. Rants that were usually grounded in fact, but bereft of context. Often they sounded dated, as if he were channeling a college teach-in from 1968. Rather than leading a prosperous congregation that included police commanders, celebrities, wealthy business people, and the Chicago school superintendent." Motherfucker, that's exactly who he should be telling those things to. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Why do you think the police, rich people, celebrities shouldn't be the targets for critiques of capitalism and imperialism and the drug war. Like, that's exactly who Reverend Wright should be talking to and ranting at.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's precisely. So like the fact that like he thinks it was like, oh, you don't know your audience is just so telling to me.
Yeah.
It's like, no, dude, that's what speaking truth to power is about. That's actually trying to transform the people who are perpetuating injustice. And so like I about like threw myself off the balcony just because like he, as self-aware as he is, this I think is so unaware.
Yeah.
Right. That comment that like, so he obviously doesn't understand the need to challenge power. You know, and he has this kind of idea that civility politics and discourse is all you can do. Even though time and time again, he documents the intransigence of the GOP, the inability of people in power to actually concede to rational discourse or facts. And so it's just so sad that he betrays his pastor and lifelong friend while at the same time not understanding the very points that are so important to understand about actually addressing and challenging these power asymmetries.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And this maybe is my penultimate quote here. Talking about the Affordable Care Act. He says, by preemptively spinning, so he's talking about, the like critics of like people who said that Obamacare was more or less like the wrong direction. He says, quote, by preemptively spinning what could be a monumental, if imperfect, victory into a bitter defeat, the criticism contributed to a potential long-term demoralization of Democratic voters, otherwise known as what's the point of voting if nothing ever changes syndrome, making it even harder for us to win elections and move progressive legislation forward in the future. And I think the proximate thing to say about this is that since Obamacare, was passed and implemented, I mean, it was passed 10 years ago. It's been implemented for 7 years. The basic structure of it, like the innovative structure of it, in terms of the exchanges, has proved to be a disaster. They don't work. They're poorly designed, and the like trying to jam healthcare through a marketplace is a really dysfunctional, shitty way of doing things. And right. The best part of the law is the Medicaid expansion. The Medicaid expansion is not any kind of market. It's just basically expanding social insurance up to a different means test. But a means test sucks, but it's not the same. It doesn't work through any sort of market. So when he's talking about why, why he thought it was worth sacrificing the public option, he's not really reckoning with the argument, which I think is correct, that, you put a ton of effort into passing something that was basically mistaken. Like what you should have done is put everything behind the public option and sacrifice the exchanges, or try to back the Medicaid thing as much as you could. And in fact, this actually happened in the Supreme Court. Because the Supreme Court is fake and laws are bullshit. When they were doing, what was it? Sebelius versus
Sebelius,
versus NFIB. They were doing some negotiating, and Robertson was talking with Souter and Ginsburg,
Kagan,
right? And
I think it was Kagan.
Kagan, so the liberals were negotiating with the conservatives with Roberts, and basically they gave up the Medicaid expansion for the individual mandate. And
the exact opposite trade that they should have done.
Yes. Because, not only is Medicaid expansion better than the individual mandate, you don't actually need the individual mandate to make the exchanges work as well as they do, which is not very well. But like people do not need to be forced to buy insurance. People buy insurance because they feel like they need it. The mandate is largely pointless. Getting rid of it, as Republicans have done, really hasn't done anything. And so, I mean,
and again, this was a backroom deal that came out, after the fact when Roberts was the deciding 5-4 justice, right? And he was only the deciding justice because he was willing to do this kind of backroom deal. It's just so shocking because the Democrats knew that Obamacare wasn't going to do what it really needed to do, right? And that's not to be fair. Okay, so a lot of millions of people had insurance, whether it was expensive or they could afford it or not. That they didn't have before. But for all the shenanigans and politicking that he went through, and he did some good politicking for passing Obamacare. His premise at the outset was, look, single payer is better if you're starting from scratch. And this is a quote that I've heard a lot from Obama, right? But since we're not starting from scratch, we can't do it that way. And I always thought, well, what exactly do you mean by that? And it becomes clear in this book that what he means by that is that big pharma and the insurance companies are too powerful to contest, that you have to basically bribe them into being at the table and being a part of a plan that they're on board with because it helps them too. And that's why we kept this kind of profit motive oriented disaster that became Obamacare. Because his very premise, just like the premise that Rahm Emanuel had with the stimulus, his very premise was there are powers here that can't be contested, right? As opposed to thinking, what's really going to help people would be to take on, like Bernie does, right? These special interest groups that are harming the very potential for people to be helped, in terms of having insurance, in terms of not going bankrupt because of medical bills and so forth. And he just out of hand dismisses that possibility and starts at the negotiating table with the vested interests at the table, whose very interests are exactly against the interests of the people of the country. And this kind of capitulation without reflection, I think is the biggest indictment of him, perhaps. And maybe this will lead me, I had a few more quotes, but this will lead me to maybe my last quote that I'll share because,
sure.
It speaks to really what was lost, what the missed opportunity was. Okay. So, he's talking about when he was giving speeches running for office, right? So he writes, quote, "There comes a point in the speech where I find my cadence. The crowd quiets rather than roars. It's the kind of moment I'd come to recognize in subsequent years on certain magic nights. There's a physical feeling, a current of emotion that passes back and forth between you and the crowd, as if your lives and theirs are suddenly spliced together like a movie reel, projecting backward and forward in time. And your voice creeps right up to the edge of cracking, because for an instant you feel them deeply, you can see them whole. You've tapped into some collective spirit, a thing we all know and wish for, a sense of connection that overrides our differences and replaces them with a giant swell of possibility. And like all things that matter most, you know the moment is fleeting and that soon the spell will be broken." And this is my final quote because I had repressed maybe how talented he was at giving speeches and getting crowds going and really just captivating people.
Yep.
This was a guy whose talent was just nonpareil, unsurpassed. And he could have he stopped, his campaigns were magisterial in terms of riling up crowds and bringing out crowds and giving tremendous speeches and motivating people to action. And he just, as soon as he got to office, we are the ones we've been waiting for, just like fell away. And he even talks in the book about how you can't rely on one charismatic leader. They literally stopped the ground up grassroots organization that helped them win the election and didn't tap into that ability to inspire, to use the bully pulpit, to actually change what's politically possible by fighting for what's right and actually giving. I mean, God bless Bernie. He's a man of principle, but he can't give a speech like Obama.
Nope.
So imagine if Bernie had Obama's oratory. Imagine if Bernie had the talents that Obama has, right? You don't think he could have done more in terms of political possibility by using that incredible writing and speaking talents to actually push ideologically for what is right? To me, this was the quote I ended with because it's the most tragic because of how much intelligence, talent, rhetorical flourish, and ability to inspire action and collective action that could have really done so much more than he did if he didn't have, whether it's the cowardice or the conservative temperament or whatever the reasons are for his validating and reinforcing the status quo, whether it's capitalism or imperialism or whatever, whether his civility and decorum focus, was something he couldn't get away from for whatever reason. It's just such a shame that he wasn't actually a fighter like FDR, a fighter like Bernie, that he didn't apply his great talent to risking something and being bold for the common good and for those that needed him when he could have had his power used to serve the people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of my final takeaway is that this is why you don't have a writer as president. Writers are very good at justification, at take it from me. A professional writer, I guess. I mean, I've been one for basically a decade. People who can make excuses for things. People who think that a granular understanding of what is going on is the same thing as trying to fix it. A kind of ability to sort of envelop an issue and sort of dig into the problem is the same, like can easily be twisted and turned into a justification for why, we actually couldn't do anything about it. And, it's probably unfair to say, he said in writerly fashion, that all writers are like this. but I think it is a very writerly book. It is a very, the dishonesty is very writerly in that it is very honest in many ways. It outlines the problems very accurately. It makes very many accurate observations, but in its sort of essential characteristics and its essential diagnoses, it is just incredibly wrong and misleading. And, I know that because, I'm in there. That's my business. And being able to like having a sophisticated, a subtle understanding of things, in the sort of classic, like, Thomas Pynchon type of framework. It's like, oh, I'm a modern writer. I have a sort of like holistic, like understanding of all the ways of how modern life is, like all the subtle details and so on and so forth. That, observation is one thing, action is another thing. And what
That's
Obama was missing is the action,
it occurs to me, Ryan, that, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's First Discourse is so instructive here. And I don't have I just pulled up online and a translation that's probably not a very good translation, so it's not the one that I use. But the very end of it is so apt, because the whole First Discourse on the arts and sciences is about this distinction you're drawing. It's exactly about this distinction. And so here's the end. It says, he writes, "O virtue, sublime science of simple minds, are such industry and preparation needed if we are to know you? Are not your principles engraved on every heart? Need we do more to learn your laws than examine ourselves and listen to the voice of conscience when the passions are silent? This is the true philosophy with which we must learn to be content, without envying the fame of those celebrated men whose names are immortal in the republic of letters. Let us, instead of envying them, endeavor to make, between them and us, that honorable distinction which was formerly seen to exist between two great peoples, that the one knew how to speak and the other how to act aright."
Yeah.
Yes. The distinction between being erudite and knowing how to speak well or how to write well, and how to act well and to do what's necessary and good.
Right.
The distinction between those held in esteem for their beautiful flowery words and those held in esteem because they knew how to do what was right. And I think that's the difference right there.
Yeah. And I don't think, to be clear, I don't think those two things necessarily trade off. You look at, arguably the best or the second best president of all time, Lincoln. He was a guy, who did have that subtle understanding and that, incredible literary talent, and was in merciless political operator.
Right.
And well, similarly, FDR was a guy.
Absolutely.
He never sacrificed politics to principle. But he had principles at the same time. And when he could get a win on those things, he
seized the moment.
Yeah, he seized the moment. The executive order for desegregating defense contracts and so on, and his successor Harry Truman desegregating the military, being basically part of the broad arc of the Democratic Party catering to African Americans. That was something, He didn't do it when it would have been counterproductive, but he clearly was sympathetic with the broad case of it. And that, I think is the fundamental difference between someone like FDR and someone like Obama. FDR, he was a smart guy. He wasn't a genius, aside from politics. He was a guy who, he loved being in charge of things. He was, he loved power. He used that power in a moral way, and that required many grim compromises, here and there. Obama is a person who, is more he doesn't seem interested in power to me. He wants to explain why he didn't do things. And that to me is a symptom of a sort of over intellectualized and or kind of cowardly or corrupt.
Well, that's the thing. I also want to say, right, because you can imagine arguments that are, fair enough in terms of he's the first black president. He can't be seen as the angry black man.
Sure.
There's all these restraints. I think in reading this book, that's not at all what motivated him to do what he did or didn't do. And instead, it also is an insult to people he cites, Dr. King, right, to Du Bois, courageous people, right, who as much as King was seen as somebody who was moderate compared to, say, the Black Panthers or something, he also really challenged power. And he also was tremendously courageous in the stances he took and the words he spoke and the politics he did and getting imprisoned. Thinking of Frederick Douglass, think about how Frederick Douglass was invited to speak by Lincoln, right, on the 4th of July. And he just rips into everybody about the very invitation to speak on the 4th of July and how the 4th of July was for them and not for him, right?
Yeah.
And in that speech, he contests, I should say, he contests the very philosophy of Obama and says that because of the pervasive injustice that runs rampant, what we need is not light, but thunder. In other words, how absurd to think that reason and discourse is the thing that's called for right now.
Yeah.
What you need is passion, thunder, and like calling on the conscience of everyone and this is where we get back to Bush being like buddy with Obama, and Obama feeling bad that people were protesting Bush as he was on his way out.
Oh, he's a war criminal, evil murderer.
Right. This lack of the conscience that sees how actually grave and disastrous are the injustices of the day, and the righteous anger that gives you the thumos, the spiritedness, the courage to speak out and act, in the face of that. Obama didn't have the thumos, right? He didn't have the courage. He didn't have the will, and maybe that blinded him intellectually as well. So it's a read, I think, that's quite emotional. At least it was for me to process. But I think worth doing. I know what we missed out on, but something that hopefully we could all learn from in terms of relying on the many, not the one, and in terms of really pushing our leaders to be better.
Yeah, and again, it's worth reading. I think he's one of our most formidable presidents, and just a terrible missed opportunity. And I think it's worth trying to understand and unpack why it didn't work out. Obviously the first black president, and a person who is still very, very popular among the American people, was going to be a very, interesting and unique person. And, it's worth trying to understand what happened there.
Here, one more thing before we go. The tragic end to the story for me. This motherfucker dedicates the book to the young people, first of all. And he talks about activism. He talks about, social movements and how important they are, right? And this is a guy who threw away all of the young people and the huge kind of grassroots support that he had cultivated, and didn't use them at all during his years in office. Yeah. And then like when Bernie Sanders does the same kind of grassroots organizing and builds the same kind of young generation support that's diverse and that actually has, more realization of what Obama's dream was than he ever had, right? His use of power after he's president is to crush that movement at the most critical moment, right? To usher in
use of power. Yeah.
Yes. Who he never steps into things. So that's kind of the dark ending to this story in a way, is that whatever idealism he has or he had, he has completely capitulated to doing everything that is in his power to reinforce the power structures that be, and to usher in more of the same. So that's sad, but that is, I think, an honest evaluation of the man and his use of power and talent.
Yeah, I think, you could maybe compare him to John Quincy Adams. After John Quincy Adams was president, he went back to Congress, not even as Senate. He went back to the House, and he fought slavery literally until his dying breath. He died in the Capitol building. He was carrying the torch. He was the Bernie in the context of the, 1840s, just carrying that torch. And it was like, oh, that cranky old fuck, look at him over there trying to achieve something. And, without people like that, without people like him and John Brown and Harriet Tubman and so on, it wouldn't, the groundwork could not have been laid for the Civil War and abolition, and that
I think that's a great contrast, and I hope that with Biden now we can stop the admiration of people's character. I don't even want to get into Biden's character, but the false perception of people's character, because it is such a contrast with Trump and his gross, just narcissistic, ugliness, right? it is a nice contrast to have somebody who espouses at least certain decency and civility and so forth, but to not lose sight of what really matters, right? Which is action. And it's not let Biden off the hook, maybe because he's not so magisterial in talent and rhetoric, and maybe so many people see the flaws in him. He will be pushed more readily than was Obama.
Yeah.
But Black Lives Matter came up through the Obama administration, and activists are very good about this. So the question is, can the activists expand the understanding of what's wrong with a neoliberal administration far beyond, the small corners of kind of the left? And the left is growing, but I hope we have clear eyes in how to persuade and mobilize and organize the masses to challenge and push and cajole to fight for justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as a final comment, I mean, many listeners may not be old enough to remember this like very clearly, but this time is very different from 2008. That election, I would say that's the most magical, just in terms of the feeling. I mean, I was in rural Colorado at that time, and I remember people were partying in the street in rural Colorado.
Right.
It
was something.
It was like things we're gonna fix the things. Like it
felt like anything was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like we got this guy. He's carrying all of our hopes and our dreams, and he's gonna set things right. And we really believed in that. Nobody believes that about Joe Biden. Not even the people who are defending him online. You just look at his favorability rating. He has a pretty low unfavorable rating, but his favorable rating is also very, very low. He was a guy that Democrats thought could beat Trump. They made a conservative choice. It's like, well, the party told us that this guy was most likely to beat Trump, so we're going to go with that. And he does not at all command the same kind of organic loyalty for, tens of millions of people that Obama did. I mean, for a couple of years easily, half the country would have, Obama said jump, they would have said how high. And that alienation process, I think, is a big part of what led to Trump. But conversely, now, that Biden's in there, who knows whether he'll listen or not? It seems like he's not inclined to. But in terms of a sort of like organizing left, you don't have to get over that hump of the Democrats will save us. Most people are even slightly honest with themselves, who are not just total Democratic partisans. Yeah. That's like 20 million people, something like that. They know the Democrats don't give a fuck about you. Like they're just, out to win the election and, get some jobs for their friends. And so in that sense, I feel a little bit of hope, a little bit. Not much. Very small.
That's the amount we need. It's the right amount we need. So we'll kind of use that ember and build it into a fire. But we got the proper skepticism and the proper range of affective states necessary to fight for justice, hopefully. And I think with that we can be done with this volume 1 of this memoir. But
can't wait for volume 2.
But never forget that. Yeah, I'll be less kind probably. So we'll use the past for the present and the future. And so thanks everybody for listening to us as we, had our kind of nostalgic journey through the false hopes that the Obama's administrations gave us. And thanks for being our patrons. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode.